very much for joining us today. I hope everybody staying safe and well. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the study that jointly done by ERCD, our division in ERCI, and also SARD, the Environment, Natural Resources, and an Agriculture Division. Um, on food security in Asia Pacific during the COVID pandemic. It's also my great pleasure to invite Ms. Mio Oka, the Director of Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture Division of SARD, to give a short opening remark. Mio?
Thank you, Senor. Hi, good morning, everybody. I have not seen you for a long time, but I trust you're all well. It's my true privilege and pleasure to join this webinar. I'm also extremely pleased that preparation of this brief was very timely, as WFP estimated that COVID will double the number of people facing food crisis by end 2020. I thank ERCD for the prompt initiative to provide evidence-based analysis at the time of uncertainty. I'd also like to thank our peer reviewers and sector specialists in other divisions for the efforts taken to review and comments on the publication and for sharing information and their regional perspectives. As the COVID crisis unfolds, disruption in domestic food supply chain and other shocks affecting food production and loss of incomes and remittances are creating strong tensions and food security risks in many countries. Labor shortage are starting to impact producers, processor, traders, and logistic companies in food supply chains. Ensuring farmers have access to inputs and labor for next planting session is another common area of concern across our client countries. While us in the operation departments are supporting in many ways to address those impacts, our division would like us to turn this crisis into an opportunity. I see there are opportunities to generate the structural changes to the agriculture supply system in the region. With this underlying view, we aim to identify the types of opportunities for our member countries to improve efficiencies and competitiveness in the agriculture sector and the type of investment that ADB could prioritize to support. Finally, several readers and experts, including our board members, kindly reached out to us after the publication on this brief, stating that this is a type of information that they have been looking for. We hope this webinar additionally provides an opportunity to discuss our findings and recommendations and give a chance to answer to your questions. I very much hope this kind of meaningful collaboration between ERCD and operation departments will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mio. It was really a great pleasure to collaborate with SARD to produce this policy brief. Food security issues are very complex, and then the pandemic does hit these food security issues in Asia, both on the supply and then demand side dimensions. And we have done quite a rigorous sort of research into the challenges and the bottlenecks along the food supply chain, how the COVID actually aggravated probably the existing challenges along this supply chain management. So I do believe that Kijin and then Sane will give you more details and then share the findings and policy implications of policy brief that we recently launched on the ADB website. So Kijin and then Sone, can you please make a presentation? Please keep it under 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to giving a presentation. So this is going to be joint presentation by myself, Kijin, and Sone from South Asia Regional Department. I just want to make sure that Sone is listening and then her connection is okay. Sone, are you listening?
Yeah.
Okay,
I can
good.
clearly listen. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, let me begin. So the flow of our presentation is mostly based on our latest ADB brief with the same title. And then this is a joint work between ERCD and SARD. So for the first half, I'll be discussing how COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted both supply and demand side in food supply chains. And then I'll discuss current assessment to food security, international trade issues, as well as potential risks. Then my colleague, Sane, will be talking about some policy issues. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruptions to every stage of food supply chains. So from input supply, farming, all the way to consumers. In particular, lockdowns, even though it's been effective to control the spread of infections, caused immediate and unwanted economic impacts. Let me try to summarize some of the observations we witnessed. On the supply side, the quarantine measures prevented local and migrant workers from moving to farms, processing and packaging facilities, which resulted in labor shortage. Disrupted facilities like ports also affected the distribution of imported goods, and additional time and costs were required in cargo handling. And also land transportation was not sufficient during lockdowns. The impact was particularly larger on farmers who had limited capacity to store harvested crops. And on demand side, overall food demand is likely to weaken because of lower household income caused by job losses and reduced working hours. However, the impact varies by the type of food. And a particular concern is the nutrition status of those most exposed and vulnerable to the COVID-19 crisis. Next slide, please. Okay, first, let me show you what mobility restrictions in Asia was like. The box plot you are seeing shows the distribution of the Oxford Government Response Stringency Index for 31 Asian countries over time and by sub-region. As you see on the left chart, overall government responses to limit mobility have become rapidly tightened at the early stage of the pandemic in March, and then remain highly restrictive throughout April. In May, however, lockdowns have started to easing, but gradually. And by sub-region, South Asia, which includes India, implemented the most restrictive policies, followed by Central Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific countries. Next slide. The consumer prices of staple foods like rice and wheat significantly increased in several economies. This is because of disruption in production and distribution, together with the adverse weather condition in Southeast Asia, panic buying, and export restrictions, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. For example, the rice prices in Thailand and Laopedia rose more than 20% in January to May, relative to the same period a year ago. Wheat prices also have spiked, particularly in Central and South Asia, with Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and Kyrgyz Republic showing more than 20 to 30% increase. However, the international rice and wheat prices fell in May and June compared with April, as new harvests start coming in and production prospects in major exporter countries improved. Next slide. The economic slowdown had significant impact on vulnerable employment, with 80% of the global workforce affected by workplace closures. So according to the International Labor Organization, the workers in Asia and the Pacific estimated to suffer the greater impact on reduced working hours than other parts of the world. And informal sector workers in the region, 7 in 10 workers in the region are in the informal. They are particularly at high risk given their limited access to social protection to low wages. And internal and international migrant workers also face higher unemployment risk as they're mostly employed in informal, low-skilled, and precarious employment. Next slide. Okay, before me discussing export bans on food, let us look at how much countries in the region rely on external supply in the case of cereal consumption. So as you see on the chart, there are only a handful of countries which are net exporters of cereals, which are represented in orange bars. So India, Pakistan, Thailand, Vietnam are major rice exporters, while Kazakhstan, Australia are major wheat exporters in the region. Outside the region, the Russia Federation and Ukraine are also major wheat suppliers. So this chart kind of shows that food trade restrictions imposed by major exporters can aggravate regional food security concerns. Next slide. This table shows the list of countries with export bans for rice, wheat, and maize compared with the 2007 and 8 food crisis. During the food crisis in 2007 and 8, a lot of countries adopted trade restrictions. 20 countries imposed export bans on cereals back then, whereas there are only 8 countries during the current pandemic. And also longer periods of export bans were in place during the past food crisis. In the current pandemic, so far, trade restrictions have lasted only a few months. Of course, it remains to be seen. Next slide, please. Then next question is how different the food security during the current pandemic is from the past 2007 and 8 food crisis. The current food security concern is mainly driven by supply disruptions and also logistics constraints coming from the lockdown. On the other hand, the prices of cereals during the 2007 and 8 food crisis have substantially increased because of severe droughts, lower grain stocks, and high oil prices in the supply side. And during the past food crisis, also restrictive trade policies imposed by 33 countries further drove up the prices. One study finds that around a half of rice price hike was attributed to export bans during the 2007 and 8. Another difference I'd like to highlight is that policy responses to COVID-19 in Asia have so far focused on social protection and production support rather than on banning food export bans. Next slide. Okay, the prospects of food security in the coming future, of course, will be subject to how long the pandemic would last, as well as the dynamics of food supply and demand and policy sections. In this and next slides, I will discuss some key factors that would affect food security in the coming months. First, as you see in the 2 charts on the top, stock to use ratio for 2009 indicates that we are not short of rice and wheat stocks globally. For the past several years, the ratios have remained well above the 2007 and 8 levels. And FAO's latest forecast for 2020 and 2021 also share the same view. But for individual countries, there are some indications of low stock, particularly in heavy wheat consuming countries in Central Asia. Next slide. Okay, some other key factors are the following. June and July are generally peak planting and harvesting seasons for rice and wheat, and limited mobility, if this is continued, could create significant disruptions along the supply chain. And shortage of labor and input supplies could reduce the scale of production in planting and harvesting. However, the current low energy prices will also reduce the likelihood of food price inflation. Energy, widely used in primary and secondary production, account for over 60% of food prices, according to one study. And lastly, the food trade restriction, if adopted by more countries, may heighten food insecurity. This is all from me, and let me give the floor to Sunhae, who can talk about policy-related issues.
Okay, thank you, Gijin. Let me continue with the policy implications of the COVID responses. So first, to reflect on policy implications, we have distinguished the responses into two aspects. One is the immediate and short-term measures that we have already observed, and the second is medium and long-term measures that we will need to consider for the next 1 or 1.5 years, at least until the vaccine becomes widely available. So first, the immediate and short-term measures, we observed that social protection for both consumers and producers are widely announced by the government, and the International Labor Organization said that the most popular social protection measures include introducing benefit for poor and vulnerable population, benefit for workers, or providing subsidies for utilities, increasing social benefits or subsidies to wage. And in terms of the farmer groups, many smallholder farmers in Asia tend to accept the prices of what they produce offered by intermediaries who come to their doors and pick up the produce that so farmers don't have to go to the market themselves. But under the lockdown, they had to survive on their own without having these intermediaries visiting them. And in certain markets, although the government announced the agriculture markets are essential and remain open, traders were afraid of catching the disease and so farmers had to find a sale route themselves. So we have seen that the farmer groups have posted their produce on SNS and find individual buyers, or working with the group that they have never worked with before and find the transportation, arrange it themselves. So we think that although this is very challenging time, it provides invaluable experience for farmers to directly link with the market and experience the market's preference, consumers' demand, and what they need to accommodate these needs as producers. The other short-term response is financial relief and liquidity support, such as debt rescheduling and short-term working capital provision, which resurfaced as a major policy focus. So to enable all these measures, international financial institutions like ADB were requested with the budget support. And lastly, although there are different views on the effectiveness of the regional mechanism for food security, we acknowledge that it is an important risk management tool to have the platform for dialogue and harmonization of regional actions. Next slide, please. So in this webinar, we also summarizes mid and long-term measures that can contribute to transform the agriculture sector. The first important opportunity is to enhance direct marketing by smallholder farmers. And as you may know, share of smallholder farmers in many Asian countries are between 80 to 95%. And there is an inverse relationship between farm size and productivity. So many government programs and investment projects promote farmers to group and work collectively, but this requires working with farmers who need to change their behavior and sometimes risk their livelihoods and change that behavior, although their sustainable monthly income is very limited. So it has not been easy to introduce such change when the programs or projects have a top-down approach. But ironically, this challenge of lockdown situations are removing the layers of intermediaries and having the And having the real risk of losing what farmers have produced, they themselves, smallholder farmers, are contacting buyers directly. So we think that this is an opportunity for smallholder farmers to learn about buyers' interest. Secondly, for many developing countries, while they announce the consumer protection measures and monitors the risk of inflation, commodity price projection, the reliability of such prediction models become an issue as the current data collection mechanism has a problem of accuracy and validation. So to reduce this phenomenon that farmers in 1 year having a lack of production and see the high price in 1 year, and then the next year everybody produce this crop and see the price fluctuation the next year. So the demand forecast model can be better linked with the farmers' planning. So the price management system can be enhanced by including also the management of warehousing capacities by storing stocks to manage prices. We should further explore how farmers could benefit from this use of warehousing receipts, as currently some criticize that most of the benefits are captured by traders. And we think that the integration of agriculture, sorry, next slide, please. You can move to the maybe 3 more slides until we reach the integration of agriculture technologies. Next one. Yes. So in terms of the integration of technologies, in preparation of the report, we have met with some concerns whether the use of agriculture technology will leave out smallholder farmers further from the agriculture development and the gap of the income will be widened. However, we think that this is a new reality that one cannot argue or resist, and the precision agriculture is beneficial for all. And I would particularly argue that labor cost in rural areas, at least in South Asia, is alarmingly rising fast. So farmers are depending on seasonal labor and they're competing for labor with other sectors in rural area. And this is getting tougher for our beneficiary farmers. And our project farmers actually complain of this rising cost of labor as one of the most difficult challenges. And we also noticed that globally, more than 70% of the startup companies report on cash shortage for the next 3 months, and 40% already reduced their employment. So investment in agriculture technology could be a win-win solution for the startup ecosystem as well. Next slide, please. In the mid and long term, this unprecedented challenge also poses an opportunity for agriculture sector reform. And rather than seeing subsidy-oriented policies, we think reforms should realign the roles of public and private sectors in agriculture input supply, food safety, and value chain infrastructure, quality assurance, and extension. The public sector's role should focus on guaranteeing fair labor, market transparency, land use planning and management, or food quality control. And our projects could effectively help to achieve these different roles by public and private sector through investment in rural financing, building on economies of scale and entrepreneurial skills, and pave a way to build partnership models in value chain infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the last slide is actually already incorporated into our earlier points, but we just wanted to highlight that any support should be also targeted to poor and smallholder farmers when we design the digital infrastructure, rural financing, and offer income opportunities, or the extension and input supply to farmers. So as wrapping up this, I just wanted to highlight that although we mentioned that the COVID-19 is a tremendous opportunity for farmers, but we also know that when the new agriculture measures are announced, the farmers know that the devil is in the details. So what it means is that it's not the issue about what to do, but how, and mainly because the points we mentioned here is well known to the policymakers or sector specialists, but really how to implement these measures, it's really depending on the country context. And I think that's why it's more important to share our experience and knowledge from implementing projects across countries and sub-regions. Thank you.